2:34 in the morning on the 14th of March, 2026. The northern Persian Gulf. The guided missile destroyer USS Carney was already carving a sharp, white wake through the black water when the first thermal bloom from the Iranian coast lit up the tactical screens in the Combat Information Center. The crew had been at modified battle stations for 72 hours, but the data now streaming in from the space-based infrared system confirmed that the long-simmering tension in the region had finally reached its breaking point. This was not another simulated launch or a short-range test of a tactical system. It was a massed ballistic salvo, rising from the rugged terrain near Bandar Abbas and climbing rapidly toward the edge of the atmosphere. The air inside the Combat Information Center was pressurized and cooled, smelling of ozone and the faint, bitter scent of coffee that had been sitting in the pots for far too long. Under the feet of the tactical action officer, the deck hummed with the high-frequency vibration of the 4 gas turbine engines pushing the ship to its maximum speed. Outside, the Gulf was a sheet of black glass, reflecting nothing but the dim glow of the stars and the occasional flicker of phosphorescence in the destroyer's wake. The silence of the Fistim, night was about to be shattered by the most significant ballistic missile defense engagement in the history of the United States Navy. Contact, track, number 5102, the sensor supervisor announced, his voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Confirmed ballistic. Profile. Boost phase detected. Multiple additional signatures appearing now. 2, 4, 8. We have 12 confirmed launches and more rising. 20 miles to the south, the destroyer DDG-51, USS Arleigh Burke, was seeing the same data. The two ships were linked through the Cooperative Engagement Capability, a sophisticated network that allowed them to share radar data in real time, creating a single, seamless tactical picture of the entire Persian Gulf. An SP-1 radar arrays on both vessels shifted their energy, focusing powerful beams of electromagnetic radiation toward the north. The system was now tracking the 16 Iranian medium-range missiles as they accelerated through 40,000 meters, their rocket motors burning bright against the cold backdrop of space. The creased commanding officer of the USS Carney stood behind the tactical action officer, staring at the large screen displays that dominated the front of the room. Each orange symbol on the screen represented a potential catastrophe, a warhead capable of leveling a city block or sinking a carrier. The trajectories were clear. The Iranian salvo was not aimed at the destroyers themselves. Instead, the missiles were lofted on high arcing paths, intended to plummet down onto strategic targets across the Arabian Peninsula. We have a solid track on all 16 targets, the tactical action officer reported, his fingers flying across the keys of his console. The AEGIS weapon system is transitioning to an engagement solution. The targets will enter the exo-atmospheric intercept window in exactly 3 minutes and 45 seconds, requesting permission to transition to weapons-free for the Standard Missile 3 battery. The captain nodded once, a sharp and decisive movement. Permission granted. Alert the 7th Fleet Commander and the Combined Air Operations Center. Tell them the shield is up. The ship's internal communication system hummed with the quiet, professional commands of sailors who had trained for this moment for thousands of hours. On the flight deck, the wind screamed past the superstructure, carrying the sharp salt spray of the Gulf. The Mark 41 vertical launch system, located just forward of the bridge, remained closed for now, but the explosive bolts were already armed. Inside the armored canisters, the Standard Missile 3 interceptors were receiving their final mid-course guidance updates. These interceptors were the most advanced tools in the United States Navy arsenal, designed to leave the atmosphere entirely and strike their targets in the vacuum of space. They did not use explosives to destroy their targets. Instead, they relied on pure kinetic energy, the force of a high-speed collision, to shatter the incoming warheads into thousands of harmless fragments. It was a feat of engineering often compared to hitting a bullet with another bullet, performed hundreds of miles above the surface of the Earth. The tactical action officer watched the countdown timers on his screen. The 16 Iranian missiles were now passing through the Kármán line, the invisible boundary 100 kilometers above the sea that marks the beginning of space. They were traveling at several kilometers per second, their heat shields beginning to glow as they reached the apex of their flight. 2 minutes to the intercept window, the supervisor called out. USS Arleigh. Burke reports, "They are slaved to our track. They are ready to side. Provide supporting fire on the second wave." The USS Carney adjusted its course by 5 degrees, optimizing the angle for its radar arrays to maintain a continuous lock on the targets. The ship felt alive. A 6,000-ton machine of steel and silicon dedicated to a single purpose. The crew waited in the dim red light of their stations, their eyes fixed on the displays, listening to the rhythmic pings of the radar and the steady breathing of their shipmates. The first shots of the engagement were only seconds away. 2:36 in the morning, western Iran, the rugged valleys of the Zagros Mountains. The silence of the high desert was obliterated as 16 mobile transporter erector launchers ignited their engines simultaneously across 3 separate launch complexes. These were the heavy hitters of the Iranian Aerospace Force, a mix of Shahab-3 and Khorramshahr medium-range ballistic missiles. Each one was a cylinder of steel and high-explosive propellant nearly 16 meters tall, weighing over 19,000 kilograms at the moment of ignition. The ground beneath the launchers groaned and cracked under the incredible pressure of the rocket exhaust, which turned the sand into liquid glass in a fraction of a second. The roar was a physical weight, a sound so profound it could be felt in the marrow of a man's bones 5 miles away. A blinding pillar of orange and white fire punched a hole through the darkness, illuminating the jagged mountain peaks with a hellish, flickering light. The air smelled of burnt kerosene and hypergolic chemicals, a toxic and acrid scent that hung heavy in the windless valley. For the crews on the ground, the mission was simple. Loft the warheads into the high arc of a minimum energy trajectory, aimed directly at the heart of the regional command centers across the water. In the first 60 seconds of flight, the missiles accelerated with terrifying speed. They were no longer just machines, they were massive kinetic projectiles fueled by the desperate geometry of war. At an altitude of 30 kilometers, the first stage boosters separated, falling away like spent husks to tumble back toward the Iranian plateau. The second stage motors ignited with a silent, brilliant flash in the thinning atmosphere, pushing the warheads even faster up toward a terminal velocity of 7,200 kilometers per hour. On the bridge of the USS Carney, the electronic warfare supervisor watched the infrared signatures blossom into massive, saturated blooms on the satellite feed. Second stage separation confirmed on all 16 tracks, he reported, his voice cutting through the hum of the cooling fans. The targets have cleared the atmosphere. They are now in the mid-course phase of flight. Velocity is currently Mach 8 and increasing. These missiles were not designed for precision in the traditional sense. They were designed for saturation and devastation. Each Khorramshahr warhead carried nearly 1,800 kilograms of high explosives, enough to flatten a reinforced concrete bunker, or shatter the pier-side infrastructure of a major naval base. Because they traveled so fast, they did not need to be steered like a cruise missile. Once they were on their ballistic path, gravity and momentum did the work, pulling them in a predictable but unstoppable curve toward their destination. The technical challenge for the military forces was the sheer scale of the engagement. While a single intercept was a routine exercise, tracking and destroying 16 separate targets simultaneously required the full processing power of the AEGIS Baseline 9 combat system. The computers on the USS Carney were currently performing millions of calculations every second, predicting the exact point in space where each interceptor would need to meet its target. The environment in the strategic waterway remained deceptively still. The water was dark, and the humid air was heavy with the smell of the sea. But 40 miles above the surface, the sky was a battlefield of invisible energy. The ANSPY-1 radar was now operating in a high-priority wide-beam search, painting the targets with enough electromagnetic energy to fry the electronics of any civilian aircraft that might have been in the area. The destroyers were no longer hiding. They were shouting into the darkness, their presence a defiant wall of silicon and steel. On the deck of the USS Carney, the forward vertical launch system was a hive of silent preparation. Below the armored steel hatches, the Standard Missile 3 Block 1 Alpha interceptors were cooling, their infrared seekers to nearly 200 degrees below zero. These seekers were the eyes of the interceptor, designed to spot the faint heat signature of an Iranian warhead against the absolute cold of deep space. Intercept window opens in 90 seconds, the tactical action officer announced. He looked at the captain, who remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the master engagement light. All batteries are green. The track quality is at 99%. We have a solid solution for every incoming threat. The tension on the ship was a coiled spring. The sailors in the engine room, the damage control teams in the passageways, and the lookouts on the bridge all knew what was at stake. If even one of those 16 warheads slipped through the net, the strategic balance of the entire region would shift in an instant. The USS Carney and the USS Arleigh Burke were the only things standing between a mass casualty event and a successful defense. The countdown reached the final 30 seconds. The computer system began the final automated sequence, checking the wind speed over the deck, the pitch and roll of the ship, and the status of the rocket motors. The command to fire was now locked into the system, awaiting the final microsecond of the engagement window. The silence in the Combat Information Center was absolute, broken only by the steady, rhythmic ticking of the master clock. 2:37 in the morning. The dark expanse of the northern Persian Gulf. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Carney, the air was filled with the low hum of cooling fans and the rhythmic, electronic chirping of the AEGIS weapon system. This was the nerve center of the ship, a room where the physical reality of the sea was replaced by a digital world of vectors, altitudes, and closing speeds. The 16 foreign missiles were no longer just fire and steel. They had been converted into high-fidelity data points, tracked with a precision that would have been unimaginable just a generation ago. The heart of this capability was the phased array radar, its 4 massive octagonal arrays bolted to the ship's superstructure. Unlike traditional rotating radars, the advanced system used electronic beams that could move at the speed of light, scanning the horizon and the edge of space thousands of times every second. It was currently flooding the sky with millions of watts of energy, painting each of the 16 incoming warheads with a relentless electromagnetic glare. But the naval warship was not acting alone. Through a system known as the Cooperative Engagement Capability, the naval warship and the second destroyer were fused into a single tactical entity. This high-speed data link allowed the two ships to share their raw radar data instantaneously, creating a composite track that was far more accurate than what any single ship could produce. If the naval warship's radar was momentarily obscured by the curvature of the Earth or the high-altitude clutter of the missile launches, the sister ship's sensors filled in the gaps. They were a two-headed guardian, their electronic eyes locked on the same 16 targets. Link 16 is stable, the tactical action officer reported, his voice a calm monotone. We are receiving remote track data from the sister ship. The engagement quality is optimal. The advanced system has assigned 8 targets to each ship for the initial intercept. This was the engage on remote doctrine in its purest form. The computers on the naval warship were processing the trajectory of a missile hundreds of miles away, using data provided by a sister ship 40 miles to the south, and preparing to launch an interceptor that would travel even further. It was a complex dance of mathematics and physics, where a mistake of a single microsecond would result in a miss measured in kilometers. On the master tactical display, the 16 orange icons representing the foreign salvo were now approaching their apogee, the highest point of their flight. They were passing through an altitude of 180 kilometers, well into the vacuum of space. At this height, there was no air to provide lift or drag. The warheads were essentially falling through the void, following the dictates of celestial mechanics. The environmental detail inside the ship was one of focused, clinical intensity. The smell of the sea was absent here, replaced by the sterile, dry scent of high-performance electronics and the faint, metallic tang of the fire suppression systems. The deck beneath the sailors' boots was rock-steady, the destroyer's stabilizers working to counter the 2-meter swells of the Gulf. For the men and women at the consoles, the only reality was the flickering light of the screens and the countdown timers that were now ticking toward 0. 45 seconds to the start of the engagement sequence, the weapons control officer announced. He had already inserted his physical firing key into the console, a failsafe that ensured no missile could be launched by accident. The vertical launch system is reporting all cells ready. Thermal management is within limits. The interceptor seekers are locked on their assigned tracks. The advanced interceptor was a masterpiece of kinetic warfare. While the foreign missiles were blunt instruments of destruction, the interceptors were surgical tools. They were 4-stage rockets designed to punch through the atmosphere and deploy a third stage that would operate exclusively in space. This third stage, the kinetic kill vehicle, was essentially a sophisticated spacecraft equipped with its own infrared telescope and a divert and attitude control system. Its only mission was to collide with the incoming warhead at a combined speed of over 10 kilometers per second. The tactical significance of this impenetrable shield extended far beyond the immediate defense of the ships. By intercepting the foreign salvo in the mid-course phase, the military forces were demonstrating a capability that rendered the adversary's ballistic arsenal nearly obsolete. It was a projection of power that relied not on the size of a gun, but on the speed of a processor and the clarity of a radar beam. All stations, this is the captain. A voice crackled over the internal communications loop. We are clear for the engagement. We defend the fleet, and we defend the region. Stand by for launch. The final countdown began. On the flight deck, the silence of the night was about to be replaced by the roar of the most powerful surface-to-air missiles in the world. The ocean remained black and indifferent, but the air above the naval warship was thick with the static charge of impending action. The advanced network was fully primed, the sensors were locked, and the decision had been made. The first wave of the foreign salvo was about to meet the steel wall of the military forces. 2:38 in the morning. The tactical engagement zone at coordinates 27 degrees north, 54 degrees east. Inside the pressurized hull of the naval warship, the atmosphere was one of clinical, refrigerated precision. The commanding officer stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes moving between the status boards and the master engagement display. Every decision made in this room was now being accelerated by the cold, relentless logic of the advanced command computer. The 16 foreign warheads were currently screaming through the void of space. At an altitude of 210 kilometers, their predicted impact points calculated down to a 10-meter radius on the strategic map of the Arabian Peninsula. The tactical significance of this specific moment could not be overstated. To achieve a successful intercept, the interceptor missile had to strike its target within the exo-atmospheric window, the period of flight where the incoming missile is completely outside the Earth's atmosphere. If the intercept occurred too late, the heat generated by friction with the thickening air during re-entry would blind the sensitive infrared seekers of the naval interceptors. The Navy had exactly 3 minutes to clear the sky of 16 separate threats before the physics of the engagement shifted in favor of the attacker. Weapons control confirmed the firing solution for the first 8 interceptors, the commanding officer ordered. Her voice was low, designed to maintain the calm professional rhythm of the room. Confirmed, ma'am, the weapons control officer replied, his hands hovering over the firing console. The system has calculated 8 distinct launch windows, spaced 3 seconds apart. This will ensure that the exhaust plumes from the first missiles do not interfere with the radar tracking of the subsequent launches. We are slave to the cooperative engagement data from the second naval warship for the remaining 8 targets. The technical data on the screens was staggering. The closing speed between the interceptor and the foreign warheads would be approximately 10 kilometers per second. At that velocity, the kinetic energy released upon impact would be equivalent to a 10-ton truck hitting a wall at 600 kilometers per hour. There would be no need for an explosive warhead. The sheer force of the collision would vaporize both the interceptor and the target instantly. Inside the command center, the only sounds were the soft clicking of keyboards and the occasional low-frequency drone of the ship's internal communications. The air was dry and smelled of ozone, a byproduct of the massive electrical loads being pulled by the phased array radar. Outside on the deck, the night was silent, save for the rhythmic slap of the waves against the steel hull and the low whistle of the wind through the rigging. The vertical launch system sat ready, its armored hatches a dark gray against the black water. Defense Headquarters and Central Command have both authorized weapons free, the communications officer announced, pressing his headset closer to his ear. The rules of engagement are fully met. We are clear to defend. This was the culmination of decades of military forces, naval doctrine, the shift from sea-based strike power to sea-based missile defense. The two destroyers, naval warship and the second naval warship, were currently acting as the primary shield for millions of people and billions of dollars in strategic infrastructure. A single failure would result in a catastrophic detonation on the ground, potentially drawing the entire world into a wider conflict. All stations, stand by for launch, the tactical action officer called out, his voice echoing through the ship's interior. Sequence starting in 10 seconds. Mark. The countdown appeared in large, glowing green numbers on the bulkhead displays. 9, 8, 7. In the engine room, the gas turbines surged, providing the massive surge of electrical power required to ignite the solid rocket motors of the interceptors. 6, 4. Every sailor on the ship braced themselves, a subconscious reaction to the physical shock they knew was coming. 3, 2, 1. The computer system took control, bypassing human reaction times to ensure the perfect synchronization of the launch. The command was sent through the fiber optic cables to the forward launcher, where the first cell of the vertical launch system received the digital ignition signal. The decision phase was over. The military forces were about to execute the most complex aerial defense in its history. 2:38 and 40 seconds in the morning. The forward deck of the USS Carney. The trigger was pulled by the AEGIS computer, and the response was instantaneous. A muffled, rhythmic thud vibrated through the 60,000 tons of steel that made up the hull of the destroyer, followed by a roar that drowned out the sound of the wind and the sea. From the forward Mark 41 vertical launch system, the first Standard Missile 3 shrieked off the rail. A massive column of white and orange fire punched backward into the launch cell, venting through the deluge system in a cloud of superheated steam and acrid white smoke. The heat blast washed across the forward superstructure, momentarily bleaching the gray paint of the bridge wings to a brilliant, blinding white. The sharp, chemical bite of burning solid propellant filled the air, a scent that lingered even as the wind tried to tear it away. The missile accelerated with a violence that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Within 3 seconds, it had cleared the ship's mast, leaving a jagged trail of white exhaust that glowed in the infrared spectrum like a scar across the sky. Within 10 seconds, it was a disappearing speck of white light against the stars, traveling at over 3,000 kilometers per hour. Then came the second launch, then the third, and the fourth. Every 3 seconds, the deck of the USS Carney shuddered under the force of 60,000 kilograms of thrust as another interceptor was hurled into the sky. 8 missiles in total rose from the Carney, while 20 miles away, 8 more streaks of fire ascended from the USS Arleigh Burke, creating a symmetrical cage of light over the dark water of the Gulf. High above the Earth, at an altitude of 240 kilometers, the atmosphere had long since vanished. The third stage of the first Standard Missile 3 separated with a clean, explosive snap, releasing the kinetic kill vehicle into the cold void of space. This was a machine of calculating lethality, its infrared seeker, cooled to cryogenic temperatures, locking onto the searing heat of the incoming foreign ballistic missile warhead. There was no sound in the vacuum, only the silent, violent corrections of the kill vehicle's thrusters as it aligned itself for the collision. The two objects closed the distance at a combined speed of 11 kilometers per second. The kinetic kill vehicle punched straight through the center of the foreign warhead. There was no explosion in the traditional sense, as there was no oxygen to feed a fire, but the sheer kinetic energy turned both objects into a cloud of incandescent, plasma, and shattered metal. The foreign warhead did not just break, it was obliterated, its trajectory erased from the tactical map in a single microsecond of pure, unadulterated force. The shock of the impact sent fragments of high-grade steel and sensitive electronics spinning into the darkness, creating a brief, brilliant flash that could have been seen from the ground as a new, momentary star. On the ground, in foreign territory, the mobile command centers suddenly lost their telemetry feeds. One by one, the signal icons on the foreign radar screens turned from solid green to a flickering, static-filled red before vanishing entirely. The technicians inside the command vans shouted in confusion, frantically cycling through frequencies, but there was nothing left for their sensors to track. Their pride, 16 medium-range ballistic missiles, were being dismantled in the high reaches of the ionosphere by a force they could not see and could not counter. The realization of the total failure rippled through the foreign battery commanders, replaced by a cold, paralyzing dread as they watched their tactical screens go dark. The sky above the strategic waterway remained dark and silent to the naked eye, but the radar screens on the naval warship told a different story. Where 16 threats had once been, there were now only expanding clouds of hypervelocity debris, harmlessly burning up as they touched the very edge of the upper atmosphere. The silence in the Combat Information Center was heavy, broken only by the tactical action officer's voice, which remained professional and clipped despite the magnitude of the event. Kill confirmed on track 5102. Kill confirmed on track 5103. All 16 intercepts are successful. The sky is clear. The naval warship continued its high-speed transit, the vibration of the engines, the only remaining sign of the violence that had just occurred miles above the deck. The smell of the missile exhaust began to dissipate, replaced once again by the clean, salt-heavy air of the open sea. The first and most dangerous phase of the engagement was over, and the Aegis shield had held firm against the weight of the foreign salvo. 2:39 in the morning, 250 kilometers above the Earth, in the silent, airless vacuum of the exo-atmosphere. The third stage of the interceptor missile had already completed its burn and separated, leaving the kinetic kill vehicle alone in the darkness. This machine was the pinnacle of military forces naval engineering, a compact, four-handled satellite weighing only 23 kilograms, yet possessing the computational power of a supercomputer. Its infrared seeker, a cryogenically cooled eye, was now staring into the void, searching for the heat signature of the foreign warhead. In the absolute cold of space, the friction-heated skin of the incoming missile glowed like a flare. The kill vehicle did not carry a single gram of high explosives. It was designed to destroy its target through the sheer application of Newtonian physics. As the distance closed to less than 50 kilometers, attitude control system ignited. Small, high-pressure thrusters located around the midsection of the kill vehicle hissed in the vacuum, spitting short, violent bursts of gas to nudge the machine into a direct collision course. There was no air to carry the sound of the thrusters and no atmosphere to catch the light, making the kill vehicle appear like a ghost dancing in the dark. The closing speed was 10 kilometers per second over 36,000 kilometers per hour. At this velocity, the time between detection and impact was measured in milliseconds. The kill vehicle's onboard processor made over 2,000 corrections per second, calculating the exact center of mass of the foreign warhead. The infrared seeker narrowed its field of vision, locking onto the hottest point of the target, the base of the re-entry vehicle. The kinetic kill vehicle punched straight into the nose of the foreign warhead with a force that defied conventional description. Because there was no atmosphere, there was no fireball and no shockwave, but the physical destruction was absolute. The 1,800 kilograms of steel, high explosives, and sensitive guidance electronics of the foreign missile were instantly transformed into a cloud of glowing plasma and microscopic fragments. The kinetic energy released by the impact was equivalent to the detonation of several hundred kilograms of TNT, yet it was generated entirely by the speed of the collision. The warhead did not just break apart, it was vaporized. Its molecular structure shattered by the incredible heat of the impact. Below the engagement, the radar operators on the naval warship watched their screens with bated breath. The 16 solid orange tracks that had been climbing toward the zenith of their flight suddenly blossomed into 16 expanding clouds of white pixels. This was the debris bloom, the unmistakable radar signature of a successful kinetic intercept. The warheads were gone, replaced by a fine mist of metal that would soon begin the long, slow spiral back toward the atmosphere, where it would burn up harmlessly like a shower of shooting stars. The defending side, the foreign ballistic missile system, experienced a total and catastrophic failure of its mission objective. On the ground at the foreign launch sites, the telemetry stations suddenly received a burst of static, followed by a flat line of data. There was no graceful degradation of the signal. The missiles had simply ceased to exist. In the mountain bunkers near foreign locations, the officers in charge of the strike stared at their dead monitors in stunned silence. Their most advanced weapons, designed to penetrate any regional defense, had been neutralized before they could even begin their terminal descent. Inside the Combat Information Center of the naval warship, the atmosphere shifted from intense concentration to a grim, professional satisfaction. The tactical action officer checked the status of the remaining interceptors. All primary targets neutralized. The debris field is dispersing as predicted. No secondary signatures detected. We have confirmed kills on all 16 tracks. The environment inside the destroyer remained cool and sterile, the only sound being the low-frequency hum of the SPECT, massive computers processing the post-engagement data. The smell of the ship remained a mix of floor wax, ozone, and the faint metallic tang of the ventilation system. Outside, the Persian Gulf remained a vast, black expanse, indifferent to the high-technology violence that had just occurred on its doorstep. The naval warship and the second naval warship had successfully executed the most complex exo-atmospheric engagement in naval history, proving that the advanced shield was not just a concept, but a lethal reality. The commanding officer of the naval warship took a deep breath, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. Keep the advanced radar in high-priority search. I want to know the second they even think about a second salvo. Inform the strike group commander that the northern Gulf is secure. The shield held. 2:41 in the morning. The underground Iranian missile command center near Bandar Abbas. The 16 radar tracks, which only moments ago were steady green lines, arcing toward their targets across the Gulf, had disintegrated into a chaotic spray of white noise and flickering static. Inside the reinforced concrete bunker, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and the frantic, overlapping shouts of technicians, who were watching their screens go dark in real time. The Iranian battery commander stood frozen, his hand still hovering over a communications handset that was now emitting nothing but the flat, dead hiss of lost telemetry. Their most sophisticated weapon system, the Khorramshahr medium-range missile, had not just failed, it had been surgically removed from the sky by a force they could neither jam nor outmaneuver. The reaction inside the bunker was one of immediate, localized panic as the realization of the total failure set in. Operators frantically cycled through backup frequencies, desperate to find a signal from the warheads that were supposed to be entering their terminal descent phase. But there was nothing. The 16 warheads had been intercepted at the absolute apex of their flight, hundreds of kilometers above the surface of the Earth. One technician threw his headset onto the console in a fit of powerless rage, the plastic cracking against the metal housing, while others simply stared at their monitors, their faces pale in the flickering light of the failure alerts. The physical reality of the intercept was a display of pure kinetic violence. Each military interceptor, kinetic kill vehicle, had punched clean through the center of its assigned foreign warhead. At a closing speed of 10 kilometers per second. There was no chemical explosion to fuel a fire in the vacuum, but the impact released over 130 megajoules of energy, equivalent to a multi-ton freight train hitting a solid wall at 500 kilometers per hour. The Iranian missiles were obliterated instantly. Their heavy steel casings and high explosive payloads transformed into a fine, incandescent mist of plasma and microscopic fragments. The warheads did not just break apart, they were vaporized, their molecular structures shattered by the sheer force of the American hit. High above the strategic waterway, the immediate aftermath was a silent, haunting spectacle of technology and physics. The 16 clouds of hypervelocity debris began to expand into shimmering veils of silver and white, catching the distant light of the sun from beyond the Earth's curve. To an observer on the ground, it looked like a sudden, localized shower of shooting stars, as the heaviest fragments began to touch the uppermost layers of the atmosphere and burn up in long, brilliant streaks of orange light. The sky, which had been a battlefield of invisible energy only seconds before, was now a graveyard of shattered foreign ambitions. On the bridge of the naval warship, the silence was absolute. The tactical action officer watched the debris field disperse on his primary display, the orange icons of the threats replaced by the dull gray of non-threatening clutter. The ship's advanced radar continued to sweep the horizon, its electronic beams searching for any sign of a follow-on strike, but the foreign coast remained quiet. The radio channels used by the foreign coastal batteries, usually filled with coordinated chatter, had gone completely silent. It was the dead silence of an adversary who had just realized their primary sword had been broken against an unbreakable shield. The environmental detail inside the destroyer remained one of professional, clinical focus. The smell of burnt missile propellant from the earlier launches had finally been filtered out by the ventilation system, replaced by the cool, dry air of the Combat Information Center. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic pinging of the sonar and the low-frequency hum of the advanced computers. The crew remained at their stations, fingers poised over their keys, ready for the next move, but the immediate crisis had passed. The 16 warheads that could have ignited a regional war were now nothing more than cooling dust settling into the high ionosphere. Radar reports all primary tracks have been successfully neutralized, the tactical action officer announced, his voice steady. The debris field is falling well short of any populated areas. The threat to the Arabian Peninsula is zero. I repeat, threat is zero. The commanding officer of the naval warship nodded to her executive officer, a small, grim smile touching her face. The shield held. Now, let's make sure we have the sensors pushed out to the max. If they have a second wave, I want to see the dust kick up before the engines even ignite. We are not dropping our guard tonight. 2:42 in the morning. The lower atmosphere over the central Persian Gulf, high above the deck of the USS Carney, the sky appeared empty and silent, but the AN/SPY-1 radar was painting a far more complex picture. While the 16 primary kinetic intercepts in the exo-atmosphere had been successful, the AEGIS weapon system was now transitioning to its secondary mission, the search for leakers. In the world of ballistic missile defense, a leaker is any fragment of a warhead, or a warhead itself, that survives the initial mid-course engagement and continues its descent toward the target. Even a shattered warhead, if large enough, can maintain enough kinetic energy to cause significant damage upon impact. Transitioning to terminal phase search, the tactical action officer announced, his voice cutting through the steady hum of the electronics, adjusting the radar gates to filter for high-velocity atmospheric re-entry. We are looking for anything moving faster than Mach 5 between 60,000 and 100,000 feet. The environment inside the Combat Information Center remained one of cold, calculated preparation. The smell of the ship was dominated by the dry, metallic scent of the air conditioning and the faint, burnt sugar smell of the high-voltage power supplies. On the large screen displays, the 16 clouds of debris from the successful Standard Missile-3 intercepts were now beginning to touch the upper reaches of the atmosphere. Most of the fragments were small enough to vaporize instantly, creating long, brilliant streaks of ionized gas that the radar ignored. But the computer was programmed to be suspicious. It was looking for the solid, consistent radar return of a heavy object that refused to burn up. Track 5106 Alpha. The fire control supervisor called out. I have a persistent return. Altitude 95,000 feet. Velocity is 4,200 meters per second and steady. It has a high ballistic coefficient. This is not debris. This is a surviving submunitions bus or a heavy fragment of the primary warhead. On the deck of the naval warship, the secondary shield was already rising. While the long-range interceptor was the sniper of the fleet, the multi-mission missile was the powerhouse. Designed to engage targets both in the atmosphere and at the very edge of space, the multi-mission missile possessed an active radar seeker, meaning it did not need the ship to paint the target for the entire duration of the flight. It could find its own way home. Authorize multi-mission missile engagement for Track 5106 Alpha, the commanding officer ordered. And tell the sister ship to ready their close-in defensive missiles for the inner layer. If anything gets past the primary defense, I want a wall of steel. At 20 miles, the forward vertical launch system on the naval warship cycled once more. This time, the launch was different. The multi-mission missile roared out of the cell with a higher-pitched scream, its booster stage kicking it into a steep, intercepting arc. Two missiles were fired in a shoot-look-shoot doctrine, spaced 4 seconds apart. They tore through the humid air, leaving twin white scars against the black sky. Within seconds, they were passing through 40,000 feet. Their internal computers slaved to the precise tracking data being fed from the ship via the Cooperative Engagement link. The technical complexity of the terminal intercept was extreme. The target was falling almost vertically, accelerating as it hit the thicker air of the stratosphere. The multi-mission missile had to perform a series of high-G maneuvers to align its warhead with the incoming threat. Unlike the kinetic kill vehicle of the long-range interceptor, the multi-mission missile carried a blast fragmentation warhead. It didn't need a direct hit. It only needed to get close enough to shred the target with a cloud of heavy tungsten pellets. Closing. 10 miles. 5 miles. The weapons control officer narrated. His eyes locked on the merging symbols on his screen. Seeker lock confirmed. The multi-mission missile is in terminal active homing. The first multi-mission missile detonated at an altitude of 70,000 feet. The explosion was a brief, brilliant flash of white light that was visible for 50 miles across the dark water. The high-explosive warhead shattered the surviving foreign fragment into thousands of tiny pieces, which immediately began to burn up in the friction of the dense air. The second interceptor, seeing its target destroyed, executed a pre-programmed self-destruct maneuver, adding another smaller flash to the sky. Kill confirmed on the leaker. The supervisor reported, primary and secondary debris fields are now completely disordered. No further consistent tracks detected. The sky is clear from 100,000 feet down to the surface. The sister ship, 20 miles away, reported that its defensive missiles and its close-in weapon systems remained in a standby active status. These were the final layers of the onion, the last-ditch defenses that would engage any threat within 10 miles of the hull. But for tonight, they were not needed. The combination of the long-range interceptor in space and the multi-mission missile in the upper atmosphere had proven to be an impassable barrier. The tactical significance of the terminal intercept was clear to every officer in the room. By successfully managing the leaker, the naval warship had demonstrated that the advanced system was not just lucky, it was redundant and resilient. It could handle the chaos of a shattered target just as easily as the clean lines of an initial launch. The commanding officer stepped back from the console, her face illuminated by the soft green glow of the tactical map. All stations. This is the captain. Terminal engagement is complete. Maintain high alert. Status on all sensors. Damage control teams, conduct a full sweep of the vertical launch system decks for any heat damage or debris. We've used a lot of interceptors tonight, and I want to know exactly what we have left in the magazines. The ship continued its silent, high-speed patrol. The smell of the sea was beginning to return, drifting in through the ventilation intakes as the smoke from the multi-mission missile launches cleared the deck. The crew remained tense, but the immediate, crushing pressure of the ballistic salvo had begun to lift. The shield had not just held, it had performed perfectly across every layer of the engagement. 2:45 in the morning on the 14th of March. USS Carney and USS Arleigh Burke maintained their high-speed patrol patterns in the northern Persian Gulf. The immediate violence of the missile engagement had faded into a tense, heavy silence, but the intensity inside the combat information centers remained at a fever pitch. The primary objective had been achieved, yet the mission was now transitioning into the critical phase of damage assessment and threat verification. The AN/SPY-1 radar arrays on both destroyers were now operating in a high-fidelity assessment mode, their electronic beams sweeping the sky to confirm that the 16 Iranian warheads were truly gone. The computers were currently tracking over 4,000 separate pieces of debris, each one a cooling fragment of the Shahab-3 and Khorramshahr missiles that had been destroyed minutes earlier. The air over the flight deck of the USS Carney was cold and carried the sharp, lingering smell of salt spray mixed with the acrid chemical scent of spent rocket motor propellant. The black water of the Gulf slapped rhythmically against the steel hull, a sound that felt strangely normal after the bone-shaking roar of the Standard Missile-3 launches. Above the ship, the long, jagged white streaks of missile exhaust were slowly dissipating into the humid night air, looking like pale ghosts against the dark canopy of the stars. The sky, which had been a battlefield of hypervelocity projectiles just 5 minutes ago, was returning to its natural state. All stations. This is the Tactical Action Officer, a voice announced over the internal net, the tone professional and devoid of unnecessary emotion. We have completed the initial radar sweep from the surface up to 300 kilometers. There are no active ballistic tracks remaining. The debris field from the primary intercepts is falling into the unpopulated waters of the Central Gulf. We have 0 reported impacts on any regional land-based targets. Inside the Combat Information Center, the commanding officer stood by the master tactical console, reviewing the consolidated report from the AEGIS weapon system. The data was unequivocal. Every single one of the 16 medium-range ballistic missiles launched from the Iranian coast had been successfully neutralized. The Cooperative Engagement link with the USS Arleigh Burke had functioned perfectly, allowing the two ships to operate as a single, flawless defensive unit. The defense had been 100% effective, a feat of technical precision that would be studied by naval strategists for decades. Inform the 7th Fleet Commander and Central Command that the Northern Gulf is secure, the commanding officer ordered. Report that the Aegis shield is fully operational and that we are maintaining our current station. I want a full status report on our remaining interceptor inventory within the next 10 minutes. The tactical significance of this confirmation was immense. By verifying the total destruction of the salvo, the United States Navy was sending a clear signal to the adversary that their most potent strategic weapon had been rendered useless. The 16 warheads, which represented a massive investment in Iranian military resources and political capital, had been converted into harmless dust before they could even threaten their targets. This was the ultimate validation of American naval doctrine, proving that the multi-layered defense of the carrier strike group was an impassable barrier. On the flight deck, the damage control teams were already moving. Sailors in heavy flash gear and helmets moved carefully around the forward Mark 41 vertical launch system, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They were looking for any signs of heat damage to the armored hatches or debris that might interfere with a follow-on launch. The deck was still warm to the touch near the launch cells, a physical reminder of the incredible energy that had been released during the engagement. The smell of the sea, thick with salt, and the iron scent of deep water was beginning to overpower the company smell of the missiles. The executive officer moved through the Combat Information Center, checking on his sailors. Many of them were only now beginning to feel the adrenaline dump. their hands shaking slightly as they remained focused on their consoles. "Good work, everyone," he said quietly, his voice carrying through the hum of the electronics. "You did exactly what you were trained to do. You saved lives tonight. Stay sharp. We aren't out of the woods yet." The radar screens continued to refresh every microsecond, painting a picture of an empty sky. The only other contacts were friendly, a pair of FA-18 fighters from the Carrier Strike Group further south, circling at 30,000 feet to provide additional air cover, and an E-2 Charlie Hawkeye early warning aircraft that was acting as the eyes of the fleet. The coordination between the surface ships and the air wing was seamless. A layered net, sensors, and shooters that made the Persian Gulf the most heavily defended airspace on the planet. At coordinates 27 degrees north, 54 degrees east, the two destroyers turned in unison, their wakes crossing in a white X on the black water. They were the silent sentinels of the Gulf, their presence a guarantee of stability in a region that had just brushed against the edge of a major war. The debris of the Iranian missiles was now hitting the water miles away, sinking into the dark depths of the sea, leaving no trace of the threat that had existed only moments before. 3 in the morning. The central Persian Gulf, 40 miles south of the initial engagement zone. The adrenaline that had electrified the combat information centers of the USS Carney and the USS Arleigh Burke for the last 30 minutes was beginning to ebb, replaced by the heavy, bone-deep fatigue of sustained high-alert operations. While the tactical screens remained clear of incoming threats, the mission had shifted to the cold, logistical reality of modern naval warfare. The AEGIS shield had held. But that shield was not an infinite resource. It was a collection of high-precision machines that had just expended a significant portion of their primary magazine depth in a single, violent burst of activity. Inside the quiet intensity of the ship's office, the executive officer began the process of calculating the engagement bill. The United States Navy had fired 16 Standard Missile 3 interceptors and 2 Standard Missile 6 interceptors to neutralize the Iranian salvo. In purely financial terms, the cost of the defense exceeded $400 million. Each Standard Missile 3 was a $25 million asset, a piece of technology so complex it could only be produced in limited numbers. The tactical reality was even more pressing. The forward and aft Mark 41 vertical launch systems on the USS Carney were now nearly half empty. The environmental detail on the ship's bridge was one of subdued, professional transition. The smell of the sea, thick with salt and the humidity of the Gulf night, drifted through the open hatch, mixing with the metallic scent of the electronic consoles. The deck beneath the sailors' boots was steady as the destroyer maintained a patrol speed of 15 knots, its wake a faint, phosphorescent trail on the black water. The moon had begun to rise, casting a pale, silver light over the superstructure and the people, empty launch cells that still radiated a lingering, structural warmth from the heat of the departures. "Logistics report is finalized, ma'am," the executive officer said, stepping into the dim red light of the bridge. "Between the Carney and the Arleigh Burke, we have used over 60% of our exo-atmospheric interceptor inventory. While we still have a full complement of evolved Sea Sparrow missiles and standard Missile 6s for terminal defense, our ability to stop a second-massed ballistic salvo is severely degraded." The commanding officer nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the dark smudge of the Iranian coast sat in deceptive silence. "Understood. The Mark 41 system cannot be reloaded with ballistic interceptors at sea. We need a secure pier and a heavy-lift crane. Contact the 5th Fleet Commander. Request a relief on station from the USS Mason or the USS Gravely. We need to transit to Naval Support Activity Bahrain to replenish the magazines immediately." This was the hidden face of naval victory, the grueling, unglamorous work of replenishment. Replenish the magazines immediately. This was the hidden face of naval victory, the grueling, unglamorous work of replenishment. For the next 12 hours, the crew would not be fighting a war of sensors and missiles, but a war of logistics and physical endurance. They would have to navigate the crowded shipping lanes of the Gulf, pull alongside a concrete pier, and oversee the delicate process of craned-in canister loading, where a single mistake could damage a multi-million-dollar weapon. Every hour the USS Carney spent pierside was an hour the regional defense net was thinned. Beyond the logistics, the strategic impact of the engagement was already rippling through the world's capitals. The impenetrable shield was no longer a theoretical capability described in white papers. It was a proven fact of the 26-year-old century. The message to the adversary was clear. The ballistic missile, once the ultimate tool of regional intimidation, could be neutralized by a pair of American destroyers and a well-trained crew. The 16 Iranian warheads that now sat as shattered scrap at the bottom of the Gulf were a testament to the lopsided reality of high-technology warfare. In the crew's mess, the sailors, who had been at their stations for the last 6 hours, were finally rotating out for a brief meal. The air smelled of grilled sandwiches and strong coffee.
I'm glad that's over.
Yeah.
There was little cheering.
Thought we'd be scrubbing decks for sure.
The mood was one of quiet, weary satisfaction. Of the launches and the way the radar screens had looked when the targets finally vanished. They were professionals who had looked into the target's face of a potential catastrophe and performed their jobs with a clinical, lethal efficiency. As the first hint of pre-dawn light began to gray, the eastern horizon, the USS Carney and the USS Arleigh Burke adjusted their course toward the south. They moved with the silent confidence of ships that had met the ultimate test and emerged unbroken. The Persian Gulf remained a place of profound tension and ancient rivalries. But for tonight, the sky belonged to the military forces. The shield had held, the targets were gone. And the long, difficult work of preparing for the next watch had already begun. The coordinates for the transit were set, 26 degrees north, 50 degrees east. The engines hummed, the block sensors remained active, and the military ensign fluttered in the humid wind of the Gulf. The engagement was over, but the watch continued.